Robert Jordan, the protagonist of Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, spends the last night of the novel in a sleeping bag, lying next to a woman he loves on the eve of the combat mission that may cost him his life, and there he is, thinking about lost things. Maybe I have had all my life in 3 days, he thought. If that's true, I wish we would have spent the last night differently. But last nights are never any good. Last nothings are any good. Yes, last words were good sometimes. Hello, welcome, and barevdzes. My name is Armen Zakarian, and here on this literary YouTube channel, I use the English I was taught in middle school to speak about literature as a way to understand who we are. And today, I want to talk about one of the most difficult arts in writing, the art of ending. Sometimes it's a twist, sometimes a whisper, but it is always a decision to make. Not just of what to say, but how much to leave unsaid. And that's why Hemingway's endings deserve a closer look. Because no one, absolutely no one, trusted the silence after the last sentence quite like he did. Hemingway is famous for a good dozen of great last lines. Probably the most famous are From the Old Man and the Sea, A Farewell to Arms, and For Whom the Bell Tolls. However, the line I choose is not from any of those books. It's almost hidden. It comes from one of his earliest stories, and you're not supposed to notice it. That is the first reason why I've chosen it. And second, that line, like a drop of lake water, reflects the entire nature of Hemingway's writing. Simple on the surface, deep underneath. So it's right about time to dive in. In the early morning on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat with his father rowing, he felt quite sure that he would never die. This is the final line of Hemingway's short story, Indian Camp. And to me, it might be the purest expression of his famous iceberg theory. It's the idea Hemingway described in Death in the Afternoon, where he wrote, "If a writer of prose knows enough of what he's writing about, he may omit things that he knows. And the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. A writer who omits things because he does not know them only makes hollow places in his writing." So, in other words, if the writer knows enough about a subject or an emotion, he can leave parts of it unsaid, and that unspoken knowledge, according to Hemingway, will be felt in the work as strongly as if it had been stated. And I would add, with all due respect to Ernesto, not as strongly, but even more strongly. Because, as Aristotle once said, nature abhors a vacuum. Let's be honest, it's one of the few quotes by Aristotle that I know, but yes, I use it every chance I get. If you watched my YouTube channel in Russian, where I am kind of a local literary celebrity and stuff, you'd know I bring up this quote quite often. But the point stands. If there's a gap in the text, and behind that gap there's real knowledge, then the reader will feel it. The meaning will flow in as if drawn by gravity. In Hemingway's world, meaning doesn't lie on the page. It lives beneath it, waiting for us to see the shape beneath the surface. And that is exactly what Indian Camp does. A short story told in clipped, dry sentences, simple and plain. A story of initiation. A story where young Nick Adams, Hemingway's recurring character, and in many ways his alter ego, accompanies his father to an Indian camp, where a woman has been in painful labor for quite some time already. Inside the 5 corners of the shanty, between Nick, his father, the woman, her husband, and the child being born, the shadow of death appears. I won't tell you whom it chooses. You'll find that out yourself when you read the story, But death's choice here, as always, is blind, arbitrary, following its own cruel and quiet logic. And for Nick, it's the first real encounter with dying, not as a noble gesture or a metaphor, but as something unstoppable. Nick's journey in Indian camp is, in fact, a descent into the underworld. The story begins and ends on the lake with a crossing, a passage over water to the other side. A body of water in literature is rarely just geography. It's a boundary between the known and the unknown, the safe and the sacred, the living and the dead. And here, that boundary must be crossed. But Hemingway adds another layer of strangeness, because Nick and his father aren't just sailing into the realm of death, they're sailing into a different culture, an Indian camp, a place inhabited by others, by people who do not speak like them, do not live like them, whose pain and whose death might feel somehow even more distant, because on the other side, everything has to be different. And so Nick is initiated not only into the mystery of life, but into the other mystery that always comes with it. The one we don't speak of, the one we hope to avoid, the one that waits for all of us, the mystery of death. And what happens then? What would you expect? Surely Nick must return changed. This knowledge, this experience, it should shake him. You expect Nick to be frightened. His father does too. "I'm terribly sorry I brought you along, Nicky," he says. "It was an awful mess to put you through." But Nick feels something different. Oscar Wilde once wrote that death is the only thing that terrifies him, because in our time a man can survive everything except her. But for young Nick, death is still something that happens to others. And as Nick rows away, leaving behind the space of death for the open waters of life, he doesn't feel the fear. He feels something else, something shocking and unexpected. He feels his own immortality. Death, in that moment, is no longer the bitter end, no. For Nick Adams, death becomes a shadow necessary for the light. Death is needed in order to feel the joy of being alive, and more. Nick feels that we need death for immortality. And in the final lines of Indian Camp, Hemingway, who has written the entire story in clipped, short, dry sentences, suddenly lets his syntax swell. The final sentence is one of the longest in the whole story. In those last two paragraphs, standing in sharp contrast to the darkness just behind us, we get a sudden glimpse of joy. Life rising, splashing, glittering, spreading in ripples and light across the water. And the story of darkness in a shanty, of silent death and its blind laws, ends surprisingly and yet inevitably with a dawn. The sun, moved by love, rises on the world, and Nick rose into the new day and into the new life. They were seated in the boat, Nick in the stern, his father rowing. The sun was coming up over the hills. A bass jumped, making a circle in the water. Nick trailed his hand in the water. It felt warm in the sharp chill of the morning. In the early morning, on the lake, sitting in the stern of the boat with his father rowing, he felt quite sure that he would never die. Thanks for staying with me on this little journey across Hemingway's waters. I hope it helped you see something in these words you hadn't seen before, or feel something in the silence between them. If it brought you closer to understanding why this ending matters, then I'm glad we shared this boat. Please like this video and subscribe. This is a brand new channel, and every bit of support helps it stay afloat and find its viewers. Well, I hope that all of our viewers are readers as well, or will be. Thanks for being here, and please remember, The great last lines don't just close a story, they open something in us. Call me Armin, and until next time.